It's the 23rd of July. I'm Arthur S. Falls, and you're listening to episode 10 of Beyond Bitcoin, a show about all things peripherally related to the emerging digital economies. Nothing you hear on the show is investment advice. If you choose to store your ill-gotten gains in something other than your mattress, remember what Adam used to say. Consult your local futurist, lawyer, and investment advisor. This week, Brian Hoffman and Washington Sanchez join me to discuss Open Bazaar, a peer-to-peer encrypted marketplace based on Miyazaki's dark market. Yeah, I've been kind of exploring these marketplaces and these new ideas for contracts for a little bit, and it's great to have some actual pros on the line to speak to about it. So, Brian, you're the project lead, Brian, right? Have I got that right? And Washington, you're involved in the market development and the contract systems.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Yep, that's correct.
Brian does all the work. I just think and write. Not to say that Brian doesn't think, but I channel my thinking energy into writing concepts. But Brian really does all of the hardcore coding work.
Yeah, I think, sometimes with these projects, it's too easy to get stuck into one avenue, either the research and development, the theoretical side, or the actual practical side. So it's good that we are able to work so well together, a lot of the other parts of the team, yourself, Washington, work on a lot of the thinking pieces, the research, the reasoning behind why we do what we do, and I try to piece that together to make it into something that actually can exist.
Yeah.
Well, someone's got to be the pragmatic one.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't have these crazy complicated systems that are easy to dream up, but not particularly practical to code.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if what Washington comes up with is him sleep deprived, or if it's something sound.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that myself sometimes.
I just interviewed Manfred, who's Spanish dude. I don't know. Did you guys listen to the last episode by chance?
I listened to half of it, so I've got the other half to listen to it. But I've been following Manfred's work for a little while. I've actually had a little bit of communication with him because I remember it was in the wake of Mt. Gox that he just had enough is enough moment, and he threw up his hands and said, "That's it. I've had it. I need to create a decentralized exchange, and I'm going to do it. And who is with me?" And he got a little posse together, and he started working at it. And he's done some really good work. And I've talked to him previously about a couple of other concepts that eventually, very fortuitously, actually became integrated into Open Bazaar. And we realized we had a lot of overlap in some of the things that we were wanting to develop, but we just spoke very, very briefly about it. So it's really cool to see that what he's been developing is it's nice. It's very well designed, and wish him all the best success.
Yeah, well, his stuff is so incredibly simple. It's really awesome. Well, let's get into the roots of Open Bazaar. So the concept originally kind of had its genesis with Miyazaki at the Toronto Hackathon, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so you've built on top of what was a dark market, and you've given it a less intimidating name to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. When the project code was released from the hackathon, I went and took a look at it, and I just was, the concept was so simple and so clean and just so inspiring that I wanted to be part of it. So I reached out to Amir directly, and he kind of lamented that he wouldn't have time to work on it with the dark wallet stuff because this was right before they they came out, they launched their product. He just said, if you're willing to do it, go ahead. Whatever you want to do, we'll support. Let us know if we need anything. And he gave us some space on their forums, and offered up some assistance and stuff. But for the most part, they've been hands off, and they just kind of let us run with the concept. And I just felt that since they weren't going to be so involved with the project, that it probably wasn't fair to either of us to continue trying to sustain that dark something name, the branding that they were trying to establish, as well as the fact that I think it was hampering a lot of potential support we could have from developers and other parties if we continued into that protagonist kind of naming. And so we just wanted to go with something a little bit cleaner.
It's not like there was a big discussion on Reddit about it or anything.
Yeah, that too. I mean, it's funny because when I initially forked the project, I solicited some support, some developers to come and try and help me. And you can find that post on Reddit. It has like no upvotes. Nobody was interested. But then when the name thing blew up, that's really when people started to come out of the closet and start arguing and yelling at each other about it. But either way, that helped. It became the impetus to really get things moving.
Yeah, it's crazy. This space is full of fundamentalists, it seems. And I can imagine, especially what you're working on is certainly very divisive.
Yeah, you just have to channel your fundamentalism in the right way. I don't think you can be a purist, like an anarcho-capitalist. You could be a purist anarcho-capitalist, or you could be a fairly moderate, coexisting with the state kind of guy. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, you come around the ideas that you want to create. And the fundamental idea is that we wanted a censorship-resistant marketplace. We wanted a place where to sort of complete, I guess, one of Satoshi's original visions, which is to, use a censorship-resistant currency to trade with other individuals in a censorship-resistant way. Now, he phenomenally succeeded in the first half. And there's evidence of him trying to complete the second half in the early design of Bitcoin, but he shelved that for probably some good reasons. He had to focus on Bitcoin. But that second half is really critical to the overall vision, I think, of what Satoshi was trying to achieve. And regardless of where you come down in your political philosophy, that's certainly a worthwhile concept to try and implement.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the dream that we all have. But
yeah, I mean, I live in the suburbs of Washington D.C. and I've spent most of my life living around government. In my career, I've done good government consulting. It's very hard to not get wrapped up in the politics of everything, especially when you're in the kind of epicenter of a lot of this stuff. And I have found myself ending up more of a purist in terms of technology rather than ideology. And I think that, my goal has been to just try and be as agnostic as possible in terms of what we're doing, because I think that, the technologies can be exploited to do powerful and wonderful things without necessarily bringing the political lean into it. I think that, as we're building a platform to build on, others can use it for those purposes. But what we're building is not, it needs to be more agnostic than that, I think. Those concepts stay pure, and, we can take a holistic approach at what we're trying to do without turning people off by pushing it in too far of one single direction.
Yeah, I think you guys are on exactly the right track. It's the less ideology loaded into the project, the better.
I mean, and there's certainly room for those kinds of viewpoints. I mean, we have a lot of people on the project that do feel that strongly. I think that you don't want to let it get in the way of actually making progress, right? Sometimes it seems like you're moving forward, but you're moving sideways, and people can't agree. So it's good to just focus on the technology sometimes, I think.
Well, there's no better example of that than when it came to the name of the project. I mean, there was a big camp that said you should call it the free market, so when the government tries to shut you down, you can have a headline that says the government is trying to shut down the free market. And I'm like, oh, well, great, guys. Thanks for putting a lot of faith in the project.
I still get those emails almost daily, and I just go, okay, well, Google free market, you'll never find us, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the guts of it anyway then. Can you explain how, the basic function of the Open Bazaar, or what it's built on?
Sure. So maybe I'll just give a high-level overview, and then maybe Washington can kind of, explain a little bit further about, the true mechanics of what's going on. But I mean, essentially, as you described before, it's a decentralized marketplace platform. I would add the word platform, because when you say marketplace, it kind of simplifies it a little bit, and I think it becomes so overloaded that most people don't even understand what you're talking about. The concept here is that we're building almost a specification or a protocol where people can build software that can talk to each other and do transactions, different types of transactions. And whether you want to do smart contracts or whatever you want to call it, or just fixed price sales, like I just want to sell a product, or an auction, sort of like eBay, all those things can be supported because the platform, the different little storefronts can talk to each other directly, rather than going through some centralized entity like you would see on eBay or Amazon. And so what we're doing is we're building not only that specification, we're defining that, but we're building a reference client, which is a web application that it's peer-to-peer, and it can talk to all the different storefronts. So everybody would download our software, run it on their computer, and all of those clients and servers would talk to each other directly and facilitate trade that way. And so you would create a contract within your software, put it out on the network, and then others could go and discover it and enter into a trade with you. And the benefit of that is that there is no fee structure in terms of who's hosting those contracts or who's facilitating the trade. When you go to eBay, you post a listing there, and oftentimes it costs money to even put a listing on there. You want to put a couple photos, you want to add a longer description, you want preferential placement. All those things cost extra fees. And then when somebody wants to actually purchase something from you, they're glad to take upwards of 10-15% in transaction fees from you just to close the deal. And now you're basically giving that discount back to the sellers, and you're making things just more clean and direct with between the merchant and the buyer. So we think that there's a lot of benefits there to facilitating that kind of scenario. And not to mention these trades, because they're going peer-to-peer over a network that's very similar to like BitTorrent, you're not really going through a middleman who might be collecting that information, performing analytics against it, selling that data to others, collecting identity information. All that doesn't happen, because now you're just talking directly to your merchant and doing it that way. So it's just you and the merchant that would have that kind of information. So you're creating a situation where there's less control by a third party of what you can sell, how you're going to sell it, what you can put in your listings, the currency you use, all those different types of parameters of your trade. And the way that we're doing it is through something similar to what Open Transactions is doing, is Ricardian Contracts. And I guess I can let Washington explain that a little bit further.
Yeah, sure. So Ricardian Contracts, I just think that this is the next sliced bread. I mean, I think it's fantastic. Open Transactions has been playing around with it and using that as their core way of doing their transactions for a few years now, and I've always admired it. And I remember when I first heard about Open Bazaar, like I heard about dark market, but then when I saw that Open Bazaar was getting started, one of the first things I wanted to find out was, how were they doing these peer-to-peer transactions? And the way it was originally designed, you would basically input your information. Okay, I want to sell a chair for this much, blah blah blah, and then it would just send it to the other individual, and you'd go from there. And there was an opportunity there, and I suggested, hey, we should really follow the Ricardian contract model because it has several advantages. So let me now explain what a Ricardian contract is. It's essentially a way of representing value in the form of a digital document or a digital contract. So it's a way of representing a physical or non-physical good or service. And the idea with a Ricardian contract is that all of the information, all of the conditions, details of the product, details of the buyer and the seller, etc., every tiny little detail of the contract is formatted in a way that can be interpreted and read by a human being, while at the same time being able to be read by an application. And so they call this parsable by both humans and computers, which means that you can format this in either XML, which is the way that Open Transactions is doing it, or you can format it in JSON. So that's the way that we're formatting our contracts in Open Bazaar. And one of the key features, one of the other key features of the Ricardian contract is that you would use public-private key cryptography to authenticate the terms and conditions of the contract. So if I'm saying, okay, I'm going to be selling a chair for 1 Bitcoin, and these are the other details, these are my details, etc., I would include my public key. And at the end of the contract, I would digitally sign that contract and then pass the contract to the person who I wanted to sell it to. And they can basically go and they can look at the contract and they can see my digital signature, and using some simple cryptography, they can basically verify that the details that I've written in the contract are correct, that the digital signature checks out, which is to say that by using this method of digital signatures, you can create a tamper-proof contract. So if you're worried about a man-in-the-middle attack, somebody grabbing your contract midstream and changing 1 Bitcoin to 2 Bitcoin and then changing the address and then sending it on its way, the way that it's built within Open Bazaar is that you can immediately determine whether there's been any tampering, because the digital signature will not match up with the public key of that individual. And likewise, once you've received the contract saying, okay, this person wants to sell it, I want to buy it, I append my details to the end of the contract, I digitally sign it, I can send it back to them, and so on and so forth, and all the way up to including a third party to be the third signature in 2 parts into a multi-signature escrow address, so a 2 of 3 multi-sig. And also they can take the contract that 2 parties have agreed to, and then they can digitally sign it, and there you have a form of triple entry accounting, which is basically essentially a way of witnessing a contract between 2 parties. And so that's the basic approach that we've taken in order to buy and sell goods and services on Open Bazaar.
I'm trying to. So this is all automated. I wonder what does it look like from the perspective of the arbiter who's witnessing these transactions?
I'm going to answer that in a funny way. I'm actually going to say I think that's an important question, but a more fundamental question is, what is it going to look like in the eyes of the buyer and seller? Now, if they're looking at this JSON formatted contract with scary public and keys and digital signatures. This is not going to help, your mother-in-law being able to hop on there and try and sell her vintage couch. And that's certainly not what we're going for. This talk of Ricardian contracts and the digital signatures and fancy cryptography, this is all under the hood mechanism. So ideally, what we want to be able to do is create a user experience that is, virtually identical, if not better, than hopping on eBay and putting your good up for sale. It's just in the background, you're just completely unaware of this very powerful contract system we have in place in order to make sure that certain types of disputes won't happen. Onto the point of the arbiter. The arbiter is a very important role within transactions on Open Bazaar, because if two parties are trying to do an exchange and there is some sort of dispute, and some decision has to be made about the release of funds from the multi-signature escrow address, this is where the arbiter comes in. This is where they have to look at the details of the case, and they have to decide, okay, who's the winning party based on the information we have at the time. So we're having some discussions right now about the best way to do that. And as a matter of fact, about 21 hours ago, I'm just looking on GitHub, I posted my latest article on dispute resolution in Open Bazaar. And that's where I finally got down all of my thoughts together about how it might work. But essentially, this third party has two major functions. And those functions can either be separated into two agents, but just for the sake of simplicity, we'll just consider them to be one person for the moment. They have two functions. One of them is sort of a notary role. So between a buyer and seller, they write their contract together and they say, okay, I'm going to send this to you for this price, and yes, I agree to buy it for that price. And then the third party comes in, the arbiter, and they introduce their public key and they sign the contract as that third witness. And using the Bitcoin public keys from each party, you can create your multi-signature escrow address. Now, if everything goes right and there's no disputes whatsoever, that's about as far as the arbiter is involved, because the buyer the seller can send the chair over to the buyer. The buyer says, yes, I got the chair. This is fantastic. Thank you for keeping your word. And I'm now, creating a transaction releasing the funds to your address. The seller says, thank you very much. They both sign the transaction and the funds are released to the seller. And the arbiter is not really involved. And so this aspect of just signing a contract and, offering their Bitcoin public key for the creation of that multi-signature escrow address can all be automated. But in the event of a dispute, you would have both the buyer and seller contacting the arbiter and saying, look, we have a dispute. This is the nature of the dispute. So you'd have the buyer making their claims, the seller making their claims, and then the arbiter within a specified time frame, which would be written in their service contract, saying, okay, I'm going to adjudicate this within the next 5 days. I want this evidence from you, this, and this from both parties. And then the arbiter can make his decision and say, this is who the winning party is, and they can write the transaction accordingly. So if, for example, there's no way of securely or beyond a reasonable doubt saying that the buyer and whether the buyer or the seller was the winning party, the arbiter may elect to split the funds 50-50. And so he writes a transaction splitting those funds, and either the buyer or the seller can then sign the transaction and then publish it, and the funds are released. Or if the arbiter finds that, hey, the buyer is in the right, then the buyer deserves to be refunded. The arbiter writes the transaction, signs it. The buyer presumably signs it, as the seller might not be too enthusiastic about doing that. And then the funds are released from the multi-signature escrow address, and they go back to the buyer. And so that's the function of the arbiter. But certainly the notary aspects, the signatures and the creation of the escrow address, a lot of that can be automated, and that's why I really propose in the article that the notary function should be a separate agent from the arbiter. I mean, of course, the market is going to decide in the end the best way to do this, but it follows along the suggestion made by Pamela Morgan from Empowered Law. She wrote a wonderful article called multi-signature addresses and corporate governance, or something along those lines. And she really makes the case, especially that the notary function and the arbitration function essentially have a conflict of interest in some situations, so there should be separate agents. I go on in my article to describe how with this arbiter role, that it's quite significant, because Open Bazaar is not only creating this marketplace platform for buying and selling goods and services, it's also creating an arbitration market, which is something that a lot of people have talked about theoretically for a long time, but we're actually doing it here. We have code to it. And it's quite exciting, because there are a lot of possibilities for creating this polycentric merchant law, which, again, if you're into the theory of polycentric law, then it's absolutely fascinating. But practically what it basically means is that before you enter into a trade, or let's say you've entered into a trade and there is a dispute, and both the buyer and the seller need to select an arbiter to sort out what the best ruling is to resolve the dispute, they can hop on the arbitration market and they can say, look, I prefer this guy, and the other party might say, yes, I prefer that guy. But how are they able to discern who is a good arbiter or not? And so there's this exciting possibility that the arbiters can post on their storefront a list of precedents. So they can say, all right, me, the arbiter, Bob, the arbiter, I've previously judged 15 cases that can be generally categorized into 3 types of specific disputes, and these are the different precedents, and I've, of course, anonymized who was involved. I haven't included names or unique identifiers or Bitcoin addresses, but this is how I've ruled in each one of these cases. And that gives a reasonable expectation for the buyer and the seller to predict what kind of ruling they're going to get from the arbiter. And so, and in the case where, the buyer and the seller are adamant about having separate arbiters, then you can have basically a voting pool. So the buyer gets their preferred arbiter, the seller gets their preferred arbiter, and then the notary or the third party who's doing the signing can select randomly or select their preferred tie-breaking arbiter. And I think the final crazy concept that I wrote in, and I'm sure I'm paining Brian to suggest this because he has to code all of this, is the concept of an appeal system, which is kind of fancy. So you can write into your arbitration contract, we can have 3 rounds of appeal, each, the case being passed on if one party decides to appeal the decision to, presumably higher quality and therefore higher cost, arbitration agent or pool of arbiters. And so you can have your own mini Supreme Court, if you'd like, for decision making. So, all of this is theoretical at this stage, but some of the code has already been written, and it's pretty exciting.
What are the challenges for translating this into? Well, I have 2 questions. A, how do the arbiters get paid? And B, what are the challenges for translating this into code?
So in terms of fees, hiring an arbiter to resolve your dispute will be very much like, purchasing any other good or service on Open Bazaar. Everything will be written firstly as a Ricardian contract. You would state what are the dispute, the arbitration details. So the arbiter would include their own personal information, their Bitcoin address. They're saying, okay, I will resolve this dispute within 5 days. If I make a request for you for certain information, I'm going to give you, X period of time to respond to me. And this is going to be my fee. And if the buyer and seller both agree to use that particular arbiter, they have to indicate in the contract that they agree to follow and to go along with the decision of the dispute decision by the arbiter. So up front, before any service or any arbitration is done, the details of how the dispute will be resolved by the arbiter will be written into the contract. As for what is a suitable price, that's extremely difficult to predict. However, you can look at existing services such as bit rated as to see or to get an idea of the price of arbitration under that system.
Yeah, I think the important thing to also note here is that everybody keeps saying that multi-sig is the way of the future, and that's a lot of the dark markets are starting to go to multi-sig. Transactions with some kind of arbitration, I'm doing air quotes right now, is essentially that third party arbiter is the actual dark market. So while they can't just run off with your funds, they're essentially determining how those funds get released or participate in that and also receive fees. One main differentiator here with Open Bazaar is that we don't ever serve as a forced arbiter. So the arbiters, like Washington mentioned, is we're creating a market for those arbiters, and so the market will decide who that third party is, not us as Open Bazaar. And then also the fee structure. So a lot of those markets will charge a set fee that they want to take as part of the hosting the marketplace, and that's hard coded into their market. But us, it's fluid. So as there become more and more arbiters, and some of them become rated positively or negatively, they will start to create this fluid market of people that you can trust, and people will be able to command higher arbiter fees based on that information. And that's in terms of coding that, obviously the code hasn't been completed yet. We're still doing that, and we're still actually walking through the process of how that's going to work functionally. But you can tell that it's going to be very dynamic in nature.
Yeah, there's just one thing I want to add to that as well. Back to the concept of precedence. Often a complaint that can be made is, well, what if one party can't afford an arbiter, or can people be priced out of the arbitration market or be priced out of a decent arbiter? And to that I would say that the precedents offer a way for high quality arbitration at a low price, because if let's say there is one arbiter who's the bee's knees, they're epic in proportions, they're like well known, highly rated, everybody loves them, and they have their precedents up on their storefront, and they're immaculate. They really are the gold standard for arbitration. Then a new upstart arbiter can essentially, in order to build their own case, the case history, they can offer a number of arbitration services pro bono and list other people's precedents or other arbiters' precedents as the model that they're going to follow in terms of resolving a dispute. So you can have potentially high-quality arbitration services being offered for a low price, which is just one of the dynamics that I guess we predict might occur on the arbitration market. I mean, we'll have to let time tell.
And this would kind of turn into an emerging lex mercatoria kind of situation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the ideal situation. I mean, Justice Ranvier has a phenomenal article, and when I was reading it, I was doing shopping, and I did a little dance in the middle of the aisle because it was so well written. And but he talks about the concept of surety bonds. So this is writing into your contract these bonds, or they're essentially a way of describing them are like good performance bonds. So you can say, okay, I agree that I will respond or send or ship the good to you within 5 days after the funds have been transferred to the multi-signature address, and that can be written as a clause within the contract. And then if the seller fails to ship the good within 5 days, then the seller can be the bond that they've put aside for that good behavior can be taken away from them and paid to the buyer because he failed to do what he contractually said he would. But that doesn't invalidate the entire transaction. It's just a way of trying to improve certain elements of quality. But yeah, I mean, he talks about lex cryptographia, and so he talks about very similar concepts to this. And it's pretty exciting to think about how it would all play out, and it's sort of grabbing the popcorn and watching. So,
well, I wonder, do you guys have any opinions? I'm wondering what this will do to how this will affect concepts of ownership, where ownership being displaced by control in situations like this.
I have a quick thought. There's a wonderful article written by Murray Rothbard and oh my gosh, William Evers. So I just remember his last name, Rothbard and Evers. They talk about title transfer contract theory. This was written a few decades ago, but basically it was described by Rothbard just a way of communicating or getting down to the core of how do you represent value and the transfer of value. And I suppose the Ricardian contract approach is an implementation of that original concept, which is to, essentially represent value by a contract. So you actually have a physical good, and then you have a piece of paper saying that this good belongs to this individual. And if I give you that piece of paper in exchange for another piece of paper, either funds like Bitcoin itself or the title to another physical good or service that I think is a fair trade and you think is a fair trade, then ownership has effectively been transferred. And so I suppose a novel way of seeing what OpenBazaar does is track those liabilities between individuals and those title ownerships or title claims.
Well, we've talked a whole bunch about the marketplace itself and the theory behind it. I wonder what kind of economy do you guys think is poised to adopt a system like OpenBazaar, and what changes do you think that economy will experience under the new market paradigm?
Well, maybe I can give you just an overview of kind of like our short-term goals and our long-term goals that will help you kind of understand where we want to go. The short-term goals for us are to capture some of those simpler use cases, such as the eBay use case or just like a fixed price contract, rather than try and tackle some of the more complex contracts that Washington has proposed, such as share issuance and things like that you hear some of the other Bitcoin 2.0 organizations kind of touting as being the future. For the most part, the people that I've talked to, the interested people that are looking at OpenBazaar for their usage, they're hoping to be able to replace things like BitNet, where you could set up auctions for selling items online.
Oh, hang on, Brian. It's I've got a bit of static on the line. Are you vacuuming Washington?
No. And even if I were, I'm in Australia, so it wouldn't affect it.
Okay. And the auctions. So most people are looking to use this for just simple transactions, and I don't think that we're seeing a lot of proactive demand for some of the more complex contract structure. But what we want to do is we want to use the simpler contracts to essentially bolster the network to basically bootstrap it to see if it's going to be efficient, it's going to work properly, kind of fix all of the little bugs and kinks that we're going to run into initially, and then use the simpler use cases to meet that. And then once we do that, we'll build upon that foundation to start to build more of a complex economy. And I think in terms of whether or not we meet that goal of being able to do share issuance, peer-to-peer lending, other advanced models, that's really going to be up to the participants. If we can't get the traction that is needed to support that, then it's not going to exist.
But I would have thought that you could interface with other platforms out there, say any of these ones like Next, BitShares, Counterparty, that offer assets or digital blockchain asset systems.
Yeah, I think that one of the kind of trends du jour lately has been that you come out with a token and then you build this complex contract structure on top of that token, and people are using that as a way to differentiate between the coins, and they're using the token as a way to basically reward themselves for coming up with novel concepts. And I mean, I don't like to I've met a lot of people running some of these projects, and they're really great people, and they've got a lot of brilliant ideas. I think that our outlook is that we're not going to tie what we're doing to a funding model. We're trying to build something that stands on its own conceptually and can ride on any of those networks. And like you said, initially we're gonna tie ourselves to Bitcoin, but really anything that supports the multi-signature kind of methodology of doing transactions, we could tie into Open Bazaar, and we're hoping that once we get more support and we're able to be able to tackle more things than just getting it out the door, we can start to leverage those other currencies. So I think that we can leverage what other people are coming up with, and we can incorporate that. Like I can't remember if Washington mentioned it. We're talking with Nadav from Bitrated. He's building an arbitration network, and we're talking to other people that are interested in different aspects of building a marketplace, so that we're not just operating in a bubble. We're working together. We're taking the best of all these different concepts and trying to encourage people to work with us, not against us.
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity for, let's say you have these other digital assets issued on these different platforms. I guess people who want to trade those assets via Open Bazaar, they can use Bitcoin as it was originally designed to be, which is a medium of exchange. Bitcoin, has the multi-signature escrow address function built into it now. And so if you wanted to sell a digital asset issued on Next with some other asset issued on Counterparty, that is most definitely very possible to do, and you can just represent the value of that exchange, with Bitcoin in a multi-signature address. So if the, buyer wants to purchase a digital token issued on Next, they can keep the money, or they can keep the Bitcoin in a multi-signature address until that transaction has actually taken place. And so, you can use Bitcoin, or like Brian said, any other cryptocurrency with this multi-signature function as your medium of exchange. So again, like what Brian said, we're trying to be fairly agnostic as to what's out there, but practical in the sense that multi-signature is really the best way to go about minimizing a lot of these risks associated with pseudonymous exchanges.
I just had a thought about your about the auction system you were just talking about. How would the Ricardian contract tackle that? Would you create the contract at the end of the auction once it's complete, or would you update that as the auction progresses?
That's a great question. We're addressing that ourselves at the moment. When I found it kind of interesting because I wrote the auction article, and it was about 1:00 in the morning, and it woke up, you know. It was 1:00 in the morning, and I was writing about the auctions, and I was like, oh, okay, how's this going to work? You need to be able to update the prices, and then I mentioned this concept of like a negotiator node, sort of a 24/7 node, which would host the contract and would negotiate the terms of the contract on behalf of the seller. And so what they would basically have, you know, the original seller would write a Ricardian contract saying, okay, I want to sell a chair. I want to start at $10 and that's my minimum buy. And I want to see what other people are willing to pay for it. And I want to sell it by auction. And so a negotiator node or a 24/7 node takes that contract and with a couple of digital signatures, basically, you know, the seller authenticating that this negotiator node can negotiate the terms of the price, the final price, on behalf of the seller, can basically receive different buy orders from various parties, and then update the price of that contract to, you know, just basically in the public marketplace. And finally, at the end of the auction, the negotiator node can write the final version of that contract, and then it can be passed around to the relevant parties for their digital signatures, and your traditional Ricardian contract model would proceed as follows.
Okay, and easy as that.
Well, yeah, it's easy to say that, but yeah, I mean, again, this is some stuff that we've been talking about recently. What's the best way to collect each of the digital signatures? There's certainly one way, like a hot potato model, where, you know, you get the contract, you add your details, you sign it, you pass it on to the next person, and that might be appropriate for certain offline situations where one of the parties is not online and can't sign it in a detached signature way. If you're familiar with PGP, you can either embed your signature into a text file, or you can create a detached signature, which is just the text file with the signature and nothing else. It doesn't include the original transcript of the message that you've signed. So there's a couple of ways to do it. I think obviously the best way is for all of the parties to be online. You can negotiate the terms of the contract. Everybody can agree to it. Somebody writes the final version, and then everybody just adds their signature, their detached signature at the end of the document. That would be the most straightforward way to do it. But if one of the parties is not online, that may not be possible. But like I said, we're still discussing it. We're still trying to figure out the best way to do these things.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think that highlights one of the main challenges with building a network like this, is that I think most people traditionally understand e-commerce as being like, well, I just, you know, jump on my computer, I go to eBay, I buy, and then I walk away, and that's it. Or I jump on my cell phone and do that. But in this case, you know, in order for the different parties to be able to communicate, they have to be available 24/7, or you have to come up with some kind of way that's going to mitigate that. You know, they're going to be able to handle that without requiring parties to be online all the time. And so we're coming up with novel ways to solve those problems. But what also happens is that you end up in a situation where you're placing a lot of trust in all these different pseudonymous parties. And how do you do that effectively? I mean, everything is great if everyone plays fair, but we all know that in these kinds of systems, especially with money at stake, that not everybody plays fair, and some people are out there to try and jack with the network, and we have to also be able to think about those things. And so, you know, we have a lot of discussion about how the actual transactions happen, but then we also flip it around and say, well, what happens if someone tries to break this? You know, like, what happens if your 24/7 negotiator node is malicious, or what if somebody impersonates that node? There's a lot of things that have to be accounted for, and so it's not a simple process, and that's why we want to start simple and work our way out. But we do have some really great ideas on how to make those things happen. And I'm sure we're going to feel pain as soon as we get enough people on the network, and hopefully we'll be able to work through those issues as we go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe this is a bit of a cruel question, but how do you intend to deal with the reputation?
That is a cruel question.
I know that Manfred just said, you know what, I just found a way to get around having reputation just by, using his collateral system. And it sounds like you've got something similar, but then you still need, you have so much, your project is so much more complex that at the end of the day, it seems like you do need a reputation system in there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. And, I mean, beyond the cruel question, the real cruel thing was that Amir and his group that built Dark Market kind of threw it out there as, well, it's easy. You just, rate people and it's done, And it was like 8 lines of code, 8 lines of Python code where you send a rating about someone. And it was like, well, I don't think that's going to really scale. So, we've had to like go back to the drawing board and be like, well, how do we make, he's like a Disney Imagineer. It's like, well, how do we actually make that real? And I think, we've got a lot of ideas on how that would work, and we have very few real working models to base it off of. A lot of our fundamental thoughts have been based off of what happens at a Bitcoin OTC in terms of a web of trust, and I think we've all come to agreement that that's kind of the approach in general that we're going to go after. And it may not operate exactly like that, but the general concept is that we want people to, as you, one thing I've noticed with a lot of these sites like eBay, Pinterest, Etsy, those types of social communities is that people start to, initially they don't really have a network of people that they trust or that they interact with, but like as they grow, they find people that they that are reputable, that they can interact with consistently, that are responsive, things like that, and they naturally build these kind of like sub networks within the overall network, and that creates this sense of trust between those parties. And obviously there are ways that can be exploited, but in general, those webs of trust allow you to establish kind of these ratings that are unique to your experience on the network, and that's what we're going to try and go for. So like your interactions with party B and C will be able to affect additional parties that come along. If they have a good experience with you, then they can trust the people that you trust, and it just kind of expands from there. And that's how we're going to be able to build that network. And traditionally in some of these dark markets, you just have these ratings, but they're all stored centrally, so it's very easy. As long as you trust the people storing those ratings, then everything is consistent. In this case, there could be people tampering with ratings. There could be people providing untruthful ratings, weighting ratings in weird ways, or trying to overrate certain marketplaces to gain unfair trust. So there's a lot of things to tackle, but we think that people that try to build kind of these like self-promoting networks will end up hurting themselves in the long run, because as people start to rate them down or kind of detach themselves from those circles, they'll get pushed to the outer bounds of the network, and they just really won't even factor into the process. Yeah, and
there's a wonderful article that has been written by one of our members of our development team. It's an epic article by Dionysios Zindros from National Technical University of Athens. I believe he's doing his master's. Is that right, Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, he's doing his master's basically on how this web of trust might work on OpenBazaar, which is pretty cool. And he's written this epic article that I encourage people to hop on to the GitHub page and to our documentation and check it out. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that we're not going for a silver bullet approach. We're not going to put all of our eggs in one basket. Like, we're not putting the only way that you can manage risk is going to be through the web of trust. Likewise, we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket in the contractual systems, surety bonds, good performance, good behavior bonds. The idea is that you would use a lot of these systems in combination with each other in order to form some sort of vague trust picture. In the same way that, if you're going to trade with somebody in the real world, you just don't look at how much money they have in their wallet. You look how they're dressed. You look, do they look kind of shady? Where are they selling? And again, none of these things individually can be trusted or relied upon by themselves, but taken together, they give a better picture of what you're trying to do. And I think there's some other interesting ideas that we've had in terms of the web of trust, that this can also can be created as a line of credit. So, it's one thing to say that, yes, I trust this person, but it's another thing to say I trust them enough that I will lend them this much money in terms of Bitcoin if they ask for it. And so to create this line of credit network might also be another way to communicate how much different pseudonymous peers trust each other.
Okay, yeah, an actual skin in the game.
Yeah, that's
approach.
right. So again, taken by themselves, you shouldn't trust any one thing. You should try to use them all together to get an idea. But of course, as much as we can, building a near trustless system contractually is preferable. But for a lot of the cases, we're just not there. We're not at the place where we have distributed anonymous corporations running courier systems and blah, blah, blah. So, you have to fall back on human arbitration services. You have to fall back on these other systems.
Okay, well, I've got a lot of good stuff here, but the one question, I guess, or it's kind of a two-parter that I have on my list. I have a little list of questions here, and we've you guys have actually gone through them sequentially without almost any prompting. It's been really great. But yeah, do you have a specific economy in mind, or can you do you have, when you think about deploying this, do you have a demographic that you see, or a demographic that you see potentially adopting this, and what makes that demographic unique?
If I can start, I suppose I haven't thought too deeply about this, so don't think that it's part of my master plan or something like that. But I have kept in mind places like Argentina, Bolivia, Zimbabwe, where you have, significant economic oppression. It's almost laughable if it wasn't so sad, And I think of those situations where, at the end of the day, people just want to trade and they want to eat, and they want to accumulate capital so they can invest in their children's education, and they can give their families a chance for a better life. It has nothing to do with the garbage that the state can sometimes say. The people just want to live and they want to thrive, and they don't want to just survive. Ideally, we'd like to see OpenBazaar take off in those situations where this sort of marketplace platform is far more trustworthy than any traditional brick and mortar system that might be available to them locally. However, if you were to take this realistically, then those particular locales may not have good access to internet, so that may not work out. But who knows?
And well, I was just going to add to that. I can come from a different position. Is that I've received a lot of emails since starting the project from different people that have different interests in why they might want to use OpenBazaar. And initially I got a lot of emails like, I'm trying to sell my shady stuff. I need this now. Like, I need it. And it was like, delete, like, cause it's just like, okay, I don't understand. But like, I've gotten so many different types of emails from people. Like, for instance, we just recently got one, someone in Spain who runs a real estate company wants to put his real estate listings on the network and wants to sell real estate over it. I got another one from somebody who said, I've been an eBay merchant for 15 years and I hate these fees. I can't wait to get off. I sell thousands of items in my, he's got thousands of auctions daily and he wants to move them somewhere. I've also got people from other types of sites that just want somewhere easy that doesn't charge a lot, to use to sell their small knickknacks that they build. And then I've had a discussion with, there's a woman named Ferishta who runs or is part of the Women's Annex, if you've heard of that, through Afghanistan. They have, these women in Afghanistan who want to work can't really do so well in that country because it's a man's world, and you go to try and cash a paycheck at a bank, and they want to know where your brother or your husband is, or there's just a lot of limitations on earning money and spending money, and they're starting to solve the problem of earning money. They're paying their bloggers with Bitcoin, but the next question is, okay, now that you're stockpiling all your Bitcoin, what are you doing with it? Like, how are you going to spend that? And these kinds of tools, things like Open Bazaar, if people within Afghanistan, these other fellow people there are starting to set up these local storefronts using something like our network, they can begin to actually facilitate trade without having to, like you said, have the state involved in deciding how you do that and who's able to participate. It's starting to liberate these individuals who are smart enough to work, to earn money, to try and provide for their families. And so I think those are the kinds of use cases that we're going to push really hard as part of Open Bazaar. Rather than have people come out and say, you're trying to sell guns, you're trying to proliferate child pornography, you're trying to do all these negative things that you hear about with dark markets. We're trying to say, look, there are some really legit reasons why this is necessary, and this is going to empower people. This is not going to hurt people. This is not going to push people down like you would like to, you'd like to think after reading some of the articles. And we had that a lot early on with Bitcoin, and we're starting to get kind of past that connotation. But like now, it's like, well, whatever you're building on top of Bitcoin now is going to cause these issues. and it's like just the next progression of people trying to scare everyone out of using these technologies. And so we're hoping that by taking these things mainstream, we're going to be able to dispel that notion.
Yeah. There's one final thing I want to add. There's a sort of high and lofty vision that was presented by Mike Hearn a few years ago, which sort of set me off and put me in a collision course with Open Bazaar when it finally came out. And I heard of it, and Brian was leading it. Mike Hearn talked about this concept called the trade net. Because he was giving a talk, I believe, in London 2 years ago, where he's talking about applications that could be built on top of Bitcoin, and what can Bitcoin support, what kind of things can be supported. And he talked about this concept of the trade net, where you would basically log on to the trade net, you put out a request. I need to find a cab that will take me from point A to point B, as soon as I can, and then essentially you would write that as a contract. It would go out on a tender market, and it will come out as a tender, and then 5 different cab companies would say, I can pick you up for this price, and I'll get you from here to there, within this period of time for this quantity of Bitcoins. And you would say yes, and then you'd hop in the taxi cab, and then you can You can tell the taxi cab, I want you to overtake people, and I'm going to give you, 0.01 bitcoins for overtaking people. And so you would basically tip the people that you wanted to overtake, so they would slow down and get on the left lane or the right lane, and you would overtake them and blah, blah, blah. Or like, oh, I need somebody to fix my car, or I need somebody to give me a fancy chair or something like that. There would be this wonderful concept of this open marketplace where you can put those kinds of requests out there. And of course, if it was designed correctly, you could also support the buzzword distributed autonomous corporations and organizations that were interested in purchasing real goods and services. And so I was looking around for like a couple of years, who's doing this? Who could possibly do this? And then Open Bazaar was just, it's a natural evolution of where this concept can go to, if everything works out. But there are a lot of caveats from here to there. But it's still, what's more exciting is the potential for decentralized marketplace platforms and what they're capable of and what they could do. So, I suppose that's my own high and lofty vision of where this can go.
It's funny that what sounds like a bad Will Smith movie made you come to Open Bazaar.
Yeah.
Everyone has this utopian dream, and for a lot of people, it seems like there may be something in the wind that's blowing in that direction. Here's hoping, fingers crossed. Certainly you guys are doing, great work and have a great platform. And I love the idea of, Ricardian Contracts are so easy to understand, and they have that simplicity, that robustness. I really think that is certainly since Bitcoin, Ricardian Contracts is the thing that's really got me excited, and it's awesome to see you guys use it.
And just to make it clear, we didn't invent that. That was invented by a gentleman called Ian Grigg in an article he wrote in 1999, encouraged people to check it out for themselves. And he also wrote an article about triple entry accounting and a couple of these concepts that people like Open Transactions and Open Bazaar, and I'm sure other projects will build on top of that. Kudos to the original idea makers.
Yeah, I certainly want to say that we're definitely riding on the shoulders of giants in terms of all this stuff, kind of making sure we can take all these technologies and work them together. So, our goal is very common with a lot of people, and hopefully we'll be able to collaborate with them, and they'll, potentially hear this, and we'll be able to get more participation as we grow.
Well, that's a ton of stuff. I suppose, how do people get in touch with you guys or follow the project? So
our main hub is going to be through openbazaar.org. You can find most of our content through that. The development of the project is all being routed through GitHub, so github.com/openbazaar. And, a lot of our discussions happen on IRC. So we're on Freenode at hash openbazaar. We're in there almost 24/7. And, that's where it's happening, I guess.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming and talking to me, guys. This is fantastic. I'm absolutely wrapped.
Oh, our pleasure.
Yeah.
I'll be in touch to catch up in a little while, in a couple of months to see how things have progressed. I know this is going to get so much interest from the community. People will just freak out about it.
Yeah,
if they want to channel their excitement into support in terms of Bitcoin funds, that would be much appreciated. But rather than just simply donating to the address that we have on the front page, although of course we welcome that, if they can send their funds potentially to Tip for Commit, which is a service that basically rewards people who commit code to the project in Bitcoin. That helps a great deal.
And also baby formula. If you have extra baby formula, Washington could use that as well.
Oh God.
Cool. Well, I'll publish this on Wednesday, so you guys can Should be
Hopefully
up
we're
by
not
then.
in prison by then.
Yeah, totally. Tell me.
Yeah,
about
and of course I'm in the U.S., so thank
If
you.
we're in New York, oh my gosh.
That's it for this week, folks. Pertinent websites can be found in the notes. Thanks to Cesis for the music, Brian Hoffman and Washington Sanchez for the content. Catch you guys next week. Same bit time, same bit channel.